Hey, you guys, Joshua here. Thank you so much for checking out the podcast. I think you're going to really enjoy the episode that we have for you. I just wanted to make a quick note here at the start. This is the first interview that Leslie and I have done with this podcast, which is super exciting. But I wanted to let you know there's a little bit of audio at the beginning that specifically with Leslie and myself that isn't typically up to kind of the audio standard that we like. But like I said, this was the first time we were doing this. We learned a whole lot through this process. And we're just really grateful that you're listening and you're on this journey with us and you're letting us learn as we go, as we do this podcast, and are grateful for that. The good news is that the audio of our guest came out really great, and he's the one that you want to listen to anyways. Greg has been in education for over 30 years. He's been a school administrator for over 20 years, and so he has a lot of great insight and wisdom, and I really think you're going to enjoy what he has to say today. So thank you guys so much for being a part of this community, being part of this podcast. Thank you for letting us learn and letting us grow and do interviews. It's a lot of fun. We got some great interviews that we're lining up for the fall. They're going to be even better video quality and audio quality going forward. So I'm excited for that. I'm really grateful for today's interview, and I think you're going to enjoy it as well. So thank you guys so much for watching. Enjoy the episode. Hey everybody, welcome to the Give Them Glitter podcast. My name is Joshua.
And I'm Leslie.
And we're so glad you're here. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for giving us a little bit of your time. I want to give a very special welcome. If this is your first time watching, we're so glad that you're here and that you've stopped by. We're a podcast about raising emotionally healthy kids and all that comes with that. And we're not experts.
Nope.
Just parents sharing our journey, and would love to share in your journey. So we're glad you're here. Hope you enjoy the podcast, and we hope to see you around and for you to become part of the GTG community.
Yeah. And if this is your second or third episode, if you're back with us again, thank you again for being here. We really appreciate the support. Thank you for being a part of the GTG community. We love you guys.
Yes, and so as you can tell, a little bit different format today if you're watching on video. That's because we have a very special guest. We're very excited to have Greg Wilkey join us. Greg is both a principal and an author. He also has a really wonderful personal story that he's been willing to share with us today. So why don't you go ahead and start out a little bit of his bio for us.
Yes. So Greg is an award-winning author and a professional public school educator and administrator. He's the creator and writer of 2 supernatural thrillers for young adults, The Life and Undeath of Mortimer Drake, vampire novels, and the Neither Nor series, starring a young hero named Edgar Flack. Greg is also the co-writer of a series of adult novels in the Starbound series.
Yes, and Greg graduated from college in 1993 with a degree in foreign language education, and he began his teaching career teaching world languages. He spent 15 years in a classroom as a classroom teacher of Spanish and French. That's interesting, French there. Until moving into school administration in 2007. And Greg is currently an elementary school principal. It's obvious that he, in his job, he loves kids. Kids and teachers are his favorite. That is very clear. If you know Greg, you know he loves kids and teachers. He lives and works as well in his hometown of Chattanooga, Tennessee, one of the most beautiful places in the world. All right. And so, Greg, we want to welcome you to the podcast. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I appreciate the offer, and I love to talk about students, teaching, writing. I just think it's important to share our stories.
Yeah, well, we are super grateful that you are here. I think you have a lot of really great insight, a lot of perspective, both as someone who's been in the public education space for a long time, as well as an author, and you have a really powerful story, personal story to share as well. So right off the top, let's just jump in here and tell us a little bit about what made you want to get into education as a career.
Well, that's actually a funny story. I never wanted to be a teacher in the beginning when I was a student in school. I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a cartoonist. So storytelling has always been my biggest passion, my biggest drive. I love to create stories. When I was in high school as a sophomore here in Tennessee that year, they changed the requirements for graduation, and foreign language became required, 2 years of foreign language. So I had never studied the foreign language at all, and to that point, so I just chose Spanish because my friends were taking Spanish, and I fell in love with it. I mean, it was one of the don't understand how it happened. I just was in class, and it was just I was mesmerized by this lady who could speak 2 languages, and she had traveled the world, and she has lived in Egypt and South America, and she traveled through Russia, and I just was fascinated because I had never been beyond the borders of Chattanooga. I just went to Atlanta or to Knoxville, and so it opened my eyes to like this whole other world. And so in that year, I decided I wanted to learn Spanish beyond just school. And as I began to progress through high school, I took more and more Spanish courses. I took a French class, fell in love with French as well. So I went to college and decided to major in foreign language and went ahead and got a degree to teach as well. And then the rest is history. I graduated college, began teaching, and I've been doing it now for 32 years. It's been a 3-decade career, and I just love it.
Now, are you fluent in Spanish, French?
Fluent? I'm not French. French I only taught for 2 years, so French is by far my least strong language. But yeah, Spanish I'm fluent. Yes, I've traveled to Central America. The school where I'm principal is 80% Guatemalan, so most of my parents and students are bilingual or they speak only Spanish. So I have the opportunity to use it a lot. So I'm actually more fluent now working where I work than I ever have been in my life.
Well, very, very interesting.
That's cool. What are some of the biggest changes you've seen in students over the years?
Oh, a lot. I've taught K-12, so I'm very unique in the fact that I've taught every grade there is in public school. Seniors all the way down to kindergartners. The most fun I had was teaching middle school. Middle school was where I spent 11 years of my career in the classroom, and it was just incredible. And a lot of people either love or hate middle school. You know, those teenage years are so unique and interesting. And I just loved it. I mean, I loved the energy. I loved the attitude problems. I loved all the drama that went with it. I just thought it was fun. So I really enjoyed working with teenagers. I just found they were the best of both worlds. They were old enough to be pushed harder because they wanted to be adult, but they were still kids, and they would still do the singing and the dancing and the games and things that I wanted to do as a teacher. But having said that, it's a lot different than it was when I first started. And I have a problem when I hear people say, kids are so bad now, kids are horrible now, and no, they're no different than when we were all in school. It's just the world is different. You know, it's not the children. It's because I believe that we mirror our surroundings. You know, you reflect what you grew up with, you reflect what you're around, you reflect who you choose to be around. So I try to remember that when I have moments where I'm dealing with hard situations. You know, even parents, the same thing. Parents are no different than they were when we were kids. The parents are just in a different world. There's a lot more stress that parents are under now. There's so much more going on that it makes people a little more defensive sometimes. And I realize that the more I work, it's not that we're a target. It's just that we're there in front of them at the time. So sometimes their anger or their frustration, it's not about us. It's about life, you know, and sometimes we're just, we're an easy punching bag. We're just there, and you know, and they know we love their kids. We know we're going to support their kids. So I think it's easy to kind of let some anger out on us. So I say that to say the biggest challenges I've seen or changes I've seen are that kids are coming to school now with a lot more emotional need than they had. And I attribute that a lot to the pandemic. I hate to use the C word because that changed everything in school. I mean, overnight. I mean, everything we did changed. And I do believe we're seeing now in the schools the results of all the time. The kids were home alone, or parents were working from home, or kids were being raised by siblings or neighbors or whoever was available. And I think they're just coming to us a little more needy, which is fine. I mean, you know, I love them and we'll do what we can for them. But I just think we are doing more now as teachers besides just teaching. We're doing the whole child approach, which I believe in, the physical needs, the emotional needs, the mental needs, the spiritual needs, sometimes the clothing, housing. It just depends on what they bring to the table. But a child can't learn, if they're afraid, or a child can't learn if they're not sure of their next meal, or where we're going home at night. And so, to me, those are the challenges I see the most. Is the kids have a lot more personal needs that are making it more difficult for them to succeed in school. But as a principal, that's my role, is to remove those barriers, to remove those obstacles, to find resources to support my students and my families so that my teachers are able to teach.
So it sounds like, kind of, if I'm reading between the lines a little bit of what you're saying here, you mentioned that parents seem to have a lot more stressors on them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Are you seeing that translate where, like, parents are under more stress for whatever reasons? There's a lot of different things that can trigger that.
Right.
And you're seeing that come through more in the kids, like their emotional needs and readiness at school. Is that kind of what I'm hearing a little bit?
Yeah, that's a big trend I see. And when I talk to lots of principals and teachers across the country, we forums and different networking situations, it's rough to make ends meet. And parents are having to work multiple jobs sometimes, or, they're out of work sometimes, depending on the situation, and they want what's best for their kids. I've never met a parent in my 32 years that did not want the very best, and they're sending to school their very best, and they're trusting us to take care of their children for them. And that's a job that I don't take lightly. I know that I'm being entrusted to care for 600 little bodies that aren't my children. But I do see many of our parents coming to us a little more worn out, a little more stressed out. It is not about being a parent. It's just about everything around them that is making it harder for them, to be present with their children. And again, they're amazing. I love my families. This entire building, I'm in love with all of them. But I'm worried about just what's happening outside the school. And because I can't control that. I can offer help. I can be a sounding board. I can be a resource finder. But I know there are a lot of things that families deal with, that I did not deal with growing up. I take for granted sometimes, that, my upbringing was very stable. I had both parents in the house. My dad worked. My mom was at home. She took care of our food, our clothing. That was just life to me. And it wasn't until I was much older that I realized, my reality is not their reality. And when I learned that, it opened my eyes to be a much more open-minded, more progressive thinker, because I realized that everyone's reality is their reality. And right or wrong, I'm not, who am I to judge? It's not my place.
Now, you mentioned the pandemic, which, I've thought it's extraordinary what you guys as educators went through in holding them that down and trying to keep consistency for the kids. But we've been talking a lot recently, just like between us, how it feels like kind of like we all went through COVID, we made it through, and now we're just going to act like it didn't happen.
Yeah.
Right.
But you're saying clearly you see the residual effect of COVID on your students still. What are some of the ways that you feel like COVID is still lingering in your students' lives that I hate to say challenges because that's a negative word, but has essentially created challenges for you guys as teachers in, like you mentioned, clearing those barriers for them to have a good education experience? How has COVID affected that still 4 years later for you?
What I'm seeing, and I can speak to my school, this is where I work, and I can speak to the schools I know of where I have friends who are principals and teachers. What I have seen is that there's less structure coming into the school. So, for example, some kids are not used to having rules or having procedures or routines. And the lower grades is where we see that the most, because I think they were the really young children, like we're talking babies, 1-2 year old, when all this, when it was happening. And I just wonder sometimes, and I've talked to parents, they've told me, that they were both working outside the house. So older siblings, we're talking maybe 10-year-olds, 9-year-olds, were actually in charge of the house during the time when we were not at school. So I just think, wow, we got children who are actually in charge of children, which, and parents had to work, there's no fault, there's no blame. But we're seeing a lot of the students are coming to us now with either this lack of structure, lack of procedural knowledge, or they are coming to us much more independent because they were in charge. They were making decisions. They were doing grown up things. So when they're at school, they have a hard time remembering. No, you're still a child. You still have things to learn, and it's not bad. It's not a horrible problem, but it's real. It's a reality. And it's not every child. I try to be careful with blanket statements. There are some students who, you would never have guessed that they went through a pandemic. And we have kids who come from families with, minimal issues, and we have families with lots of needs. So, but just in general, I have seen those two extremes. Kids are coming a lot less structured, a lot less prepared for routines and procedures, or they are fiercely independent with strong opinions, and which I applaud that too. I mean, I think when they're adults, that's going to be a strength that they'll have, and I encourage kids to have a voice and to live their truth and be who they are. And I want them to do that. But it's been different. I mean, it's a balancing act that we're constantly trying to learn as educators, how to best support the academic needs at the same time supporting the emotional, physical, and mental needs that our kids have sometimes.
Now, you had mentioned in one of your earlier answers how you learned how to give grace to parents, and there's obviously you guys take a lot of criticism. You're dealing with people's kids. There's people who have plenty of opinions on the public school system.
Right.
As someone who has been boots on the ground doing this now, as an administrator close to 20 years, in education for over 30, what are some things in your mind that you feel like the public school system, man, you guys get it right, you hit home runs in these ways, and what are some other areas you feel like are rooms that you can see improvement?
Well, one thing I'm most proud of, myself personally, and in public schools, is that we all are welcome. The doors are open to anyone. We cannot exclude based on religion, sexual orientation, race. If you're in our zone, you get to come to school. So I think public schools in general have excelled at that, because we know that we have got to be open-minded. We've got to be willing to be flexible. We cannot assume that what we think is right, what we believe is what our students believe. Because, for example, in this school, we are so diverse. We have multiple religions in the school represented, multiple racial backgrounds, multiple ethnicities, and they're all different. They all have their own sets of values. So I think that public schools, by nature of the fact that we are public, we're good at that. We're able to be flexible. We're able to ask questions. We're able to see from multiple points of view. And I think if you can't do that, then education is not for you, because the children they're coming to you as they are. And if I believe they know I want people to accept me for who I am, then I have to extend that to my students. I cannot make them fit my mold, beyond behavior expectations and rules and procedures. But as far as like who they are, who they're becoming, we have to respect that. So I think to answer your question, to me, I think public schools do that very well, because we have to. Because we do not have the option to tell someone, I'm sorry, you can't come to our school. You don't fit here. You don't belong here. Now, areas that we can improve in, I always think is just the language instruction. So many students come to us, very language deficient. And I don't mean that they don't speak English. I mean, I'm talking about they just don't come from homes where they're read to, where people speak to them, talk to them, ask them questions. So a lot of times the first time they are in those situations are at school, when they're, given a book or someone's read to them and asked some questions about, what's your favorite character? What did you like? And education is now so language heavy. I mean, math, science, social studies, it's all language. If you can't read, then you really cannot do anything in the curriculum. You really can't. So I think that we as educators, we have got to refocus on the early foundational language skills, like kindergarten, preschool, getting the kids ready to decode, to read, to comprehend. Because if you're not a fluent reader, I mean, almost everything in school is going to be difficult for you to access. Because like I said, math is all it's all language now. It's all word problems. It's all launches. It's all situations, that you have to figure out to get to the actual math problem. So I just think public schools have got to do a better job how we teach language in the early grades.
What do you think are some ways that parents could help with that at home?
I see a lot of discussion online with
Mhm.
Gen Alpha, which is our generation kids in elementary school now. And, a lot of teachers I've seen online are talking about how Gen Alpha can't read, that they're behind, and things like that. And so it's always one of those chicken or egg type things. Like, is that the parents' fault? Is that, are they not getting what they need in school? Is it a combination of both? So
COVID.
Yeah, it's COVID. Like,
yeah.
What do you think?
I think what you said, it's a combination of all those things. But now at home, what parents can do with the help is to read. I mean, to read stories, read books, read newspaper, read magazines, read anything you can to show kids that reading is everywhere. It's not just a school task. You read in life. But and if they would read and then ask questions about what you've read, don't just read the story to them. Read it and then stop along the way and say, okay, what just happened? When on that page, what did that girl just do? Why do you think she did that? To teach children. When you're reading a book or reading a story, you're supposed to ask questions. That's what good readers do. When you're, you both read. I love to read books. But even now, I'm not reading adult novels. I find myself asking myself, what's going to happen next? I wonder why she did that. I wonder, that had to be important for them to say that. So I wonder what that's going to do later. So when you read to students or read your children at home, ask them lots of questions, and have them retell you the story, in their own words. Have them even write their own ending, read the book to them and say, now I want you to change the ending for me. Tell me how you would make the story different, just to get them used to really analyzing the language. And I'm a big vocabulary. I'm a big word nerd. I love words. So, and one of the things we do at school, when we read books, we pre-read, we pull out key vocabulary word, and we tell the kids ahead of time, here's this word, here's what it means, let's talk about it. And then when it's in the book, when you hear this word, let's talk about how it fits in the story. So then you're teaching kids that words in isolation, when you put those words together, it creates an image, it creates a story. So I think if parents could find time, which is difficult, I know working and schedules is always hard, but to me, one of the biggest home improvements for teaching, I could say, for parents would be just to read to your kids a lot, read to them often, ask them questions, and just really make them get into the story and then talk about it. Don't just read it, but actually really talk about the book. That also creates more interest on the kids' part, because they want to read more stories, because they enjoy talking. They want to talk to mom and dad or grandma or big sister or big brother. Anyone can read to them. And I think when we make reading fun and make it engaging, then they will want to read more, and then naturally the reading will improve.
Well, like we mentioned in introducing you, you yourself have written several books. You're an author. I know that a lot of that for you is motivated out of exactly what you're talking about, giving kids that passion for reading and writing stories for them. What was that journey like for you as an author, as you kind of had these stories in you and wanted to get them out, wanted to get them published? I know it can be very difficult to do that. You've done that. What was that journey like for you, kind of personally, as an author?
Well, I will tell you the funny beginning. 4th grade, I always drawn cartoons. I mean, I was a visual storyteller because, when I was that young, I did not yet realize that words and pictures could go together. Okay, so when I went to tell a story, I drew it. I drew pictures to tell my stories. So anyway, I'm in 4th grade in the library. And one of my favorite books growing up, or stories, is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, C.S. Lewis. I love his Narnia series because there used to be a cartoon that came on once a year, and it was based on that book. It was a British cartoon, and I watched it once a year. I loved it. So I'm in the library, and I see this book, and it says The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So I got it and went to Miss Everett, the librarian, and I said, "What is this?" And she was like, "Honey, it's a book." I'm like, "Well, yes, I know it's a book." I said, but this is a cartoon I watched. I said, this is not a book, it's a cartoon. And she said, "Honey, someone wrote that cartoon. Someone wrote that story. That's where it came from." And when I tell you that my little 4th grade brain had a moment, it really did. And it kind of hit me that every TV show I watched, every cartoon I watched, someone wrote that. I had never connected the fact that someone had to create that story. And so that changed everything for me. And so I started to write then. When I would draw a picture, I would actually write what the picture was about. And I eventually I got away from the visual part of it, and I went solely just to the words. Because the more I wrote, this is where it gets to your question. It excites me to know that with just the right words, the right phrasing, the right paragraph, I can take what I see and hear and put it so that you can see it. And I tell my kids at school, I said, that is power. The fact that I can take, just by the sheer use of my words, I can make you see what I see in my head. And so as a writer, that's just, that still gives me goosebumps when I realize that, the perfect word, the perfect sentence can create a visual that everyone can see that was once only solely in my head. So that's why I like to write, and that's why I'm such a word nerd. I will sit and look at a paragraph for an hour and just over one word and just think, is that the right verb? Is that strong enough? Is that really what I want to say? And I'll change the word. I'll read it again. I'll change the word. I'll read it again until I get it to where I want it to be. So that's just to me the power of writing, is how to take those words and just create entire worlds that people can visit based on the words I choose to use.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're going to talk about technology in school here in a little bit, so I'm not trying to get ahead of ourselves.
You're fine.
But do you feel like, this is maybe just me personally, do you feel like part of the reason kids they don't read as much as they used to? Obviously, we know the screens and the phones, but do you think they're just so overstimulated that they don't have the ability to hold their concentration as long as kids used to?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. We discuss that often in schools, the idea of stamina. There is no stamina for writing or reading. And I do believe that it's because our brains have been trained to be so quick. Everything is fast, little quick cartoons, quick commercials, quick snippets. The apps on the video games are quick. They're quick. And I think kids are used to that immediate high from doing something fun and exciting, and it's over, they're down, and it's on to the next thing. It's always what's next. And I see a lot of students struggling with focus, to stick with a story for half an hour or to stick with a book for a week, keep coming back to it because they want to do something else. So I do think what you said, Joshua, is true, is they just don't, they're lacking the stamina, and their attention is, again, they're not bad students, they're highly intelligent, they're incredible kids. I love them all, but it is a struggle, to watch them try to focus on anything for 15, 20 minutes, and then that's it. They're ready to do something else. So I think that's another challenge for teachers, is how to have multiple activities, multiple things to do within that class period, because you'll lose them, unless they're fully engaged. Mm-hmm. And I do think a lot of the social media and technology has made that problem bigger. But I'm also a fan of technology. I think social media is very powerful. When used correctly, it's a great tool. So I'm not one of those people who say, I wish we didn't have phones, or we shouldn't have computers, or I wish we didn't have tablets. No, I think those are great. It's just that they have to be used in moderation, like anything else. Which is where you asked about what parents can do at home. That's something else parents can do, is to monitor and limit that screen time. And even at school next year, I'm going to have a new mandate here. We're going to limit screen time in the classrooms, because I saw last year a few teachers who were, in my opinion, overusing the Chromebooks, overusing online platforms. And so I want them teaching. I want the interaction. I want the human interaction between teacher and student to be the priority.
So kind of switching gears here, I've kind of noticed a rise in bullying, and I don't know if that's like because we have social media, we see it more, we're talking about it more, if like bullying has stayed the same, the amount of bullying that happens has stayed the same, or if it's increased due to social media. But I kind of wanted to ask you, how can parents recognize signs of bullying, and what steps can they take if they suspect their child is being bullied or is bullying others?
That's a good question, because it is a problem, but there's also it's a careful balancing act between bullying and conflict. So I try to, whenever I do have an issue that comes up and I investigate, I try to, if it is an issue of conflict where it's both parties just disagreeing, that's a whole other conversation, and sometimes parents, teachers, we assume it's bullying, but just because on the surface that's how it looks until you get into it. But now there are times when it truly is bullying, and which is a very serious situation, and it can be very scary for parents and for students. So what I look for when behaviors change, if kids start getting more quiet, if they're more emotional, if they get upset easily, if they're arguing or lashing out, and that's not typical for them to be very argumentative, especially towards their parents or to their siblings or friends in the house. So if you see those kinds of things, or if the child is like withdrawing, like if they were outgoing and doing all kinds of things, and suddenly they stop and they don't want to go out with their friends, they don't want to talk on the phone, they don't want to go over to a get together or whatever. Those are usually signs something's wrong. There's a social interaction problem that's happening. And then again, goes back to the idea of reading to kids. I mean, talk. Ask your child. Hey, you seem like you're a little upset. Is there something wrong? Is it something at home? Is it something at school? Is there a problem with some of your friends? Just ask those questions. Now they may not tell you, because a lot of times kids won't in the beginning. They'll mask it, but just don't stop. You have to be relentless. You have to keep going back, because it's important to know what's happening in your child's life. Because here's a principal, trust me, I wear them down with questions. If I see a problem, if I think something's wrong, I'm gonna talk, and I'm gonna call your parents, I'm gonna call whoever you live with, and I'm gonna get everybody involved, because I do not want to be the one who missed something, and because of what I didn't do, because of my lack of action, it could result in horrible outcomes for multiple people. So, as parents and as educators, as adults, in any child's life, we need to ask questions, and find out what's going on. And you hit it when you said, Leslie, earlier about social media. I think that has made it worse, because when I was growing up, bullying is not new. Bullying has been here since humans have interacted. We have people who are bullies. I mean, that's just life. But we used could separate. You could go home, and for 12, 13, 14 hours, you didn't see or talk or hear those people again until the very next day. Now it's constant access to people. Kids can see the Instagram, they can see the Snapchat, they can see the TikToks, and they can't ever shut it off. And so in their brain, it's so much bigger than it actually is. Again, that's where parents come in and say, no phone, get your phones given to me. We're shutting off. We're not going to let you have social media because it's negatively impacting you. But then at least it gives the kid a break from that group of people or that one person until like the next day. But there's no time to disconnect. I mean, we are all so connected now that we don't know when to separate and say, what, I'm home. This is my time. This is my family time. I can't do that until tomorrow. But kids don't have that way. They can't think that way. They're still learning how to think that way. I read a book years ago, or actually an article. It was called The Landscape of the Adolescent Brain. And it talked about how, adults, we can see beyond. Like, here's now, but I know that over here is tomorrow, down here's next week, over here's next year. I can see beyond this moment. A lot of times teenagers can't do that, nor can children. Their world is right here. So all they know is this moment. So if it's bad, then their whole world is bad, because they don't understand in a half an hour, in 15 minutes, in another day, it won't be bad. So I think that's what we have to remember. We have to remind kids. We have to teach them to see beyond. Yes, it's bad now. Yes, it's horrible now. You can be upset. You can cry. You can be whatever. But just know that this is going to pass. This is not going to be here forever. And I just don't think kids get that like they used to, because their whole world is just what's in front of them. And if it's bad, it's bad. And they can't see past it. And I just hate that, because I want to remind them and tell them so badly, I promise you, this is not going to be forever. I promise you. One day you're going to look back, and these things that bothered you aren't going to bother you as much as you thought they did. But they just don't know that. So that's where I think educators and teachers and parents, adults, need to talk to kids more like that, to reassure them this is going to pass, and tell your own stories about your own struggles. I mean, we've all been there. We've all been bullied on some level by somebody. It could be someone in your own family. It could be a former classmate. It could be a former coworker. There are lots of adult bullies who bully adults. But so I think it's important for kids to hear us say, well, when I was 11 years old, X, Y, Z happened to me. Or when I was 15 in middle school, this happened to me, and this is how I dealt with it. So I think if they can see us as being survivors of bullying situations, it also gives them more hope and actually empowers them to talk and to share.
What about for parents who feel like their child is being bullied? How do they, in your perspective, initially have those conversations at home as they're figuring that out, but then B, approach you guys as teachers and administrators in working through that? Because I mean, naturally, you kind of want to have that like mama bear instinct of like, I'm going to protect my kids. I'm sure you get that a lot where like they come in hot and hostile.
Yeah.
But even to, I know you work with elementary kids, but even for those who have older kids, in balancing like, okay, I'm going to interject myself into this as your parent versus let me help you navigate this on your own. Like that balance too.
How do you advocate for your child without adding to the conflict?
Yeah.
Or taking it over for them and not allowing them to learn healthy conflict resolution.
Right. Well, I think there's a balance again. I mean, I think kids should struggle some because that's how you learn. And like you just said, how to find their own voice and how to work through conflict. Because one of your episodes I watched earlier, you were all talking about how like you can't always be their protector. You can't always be their. I forget how you worded it, but it was a great episode. I loved it because that's true. I mean, when they're little and they're with you all, when they're with us in school, we can do all that stuff for them. But at some point, they're going to be on their own. Whether it be at college or, married or moving out to their own apartment or whatever reason. So kids have got to have some kind of realistic struggle because that's how you learn. But when it comes to a point where it's not realistic anymore, when it's going to harm them, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, that's where we have to step in. So I think number one, parents you've got to talk to your kid. You got to ask them questions. You got to say, "I'm your mom. I'm your dad. I'm your uncle. I'm your aunt. I know you. This is not. You're not acting. Something's wrong." Because and they trust us. They do. Now they may get angry and they may shut down in the moment, but don't stop. You need to give them a little time to breathe, and then say, "Hey, can we talk more about what we were discussing earlier? I just don't think you're happy. Is there a problem? Talk to me. Let me know what's going on." Ask your child, have you told your teacher? Have you spoken to the principal? Have you talked to the school counselor? Because sometimes kids don't tell at school. They all let it be known. Now, if we see it ourselves, great. But sometimes, kids are tricky. Kids are sneaky. And we don't always see it. So a lot of times it's simple from a parent telling the child, go speak to Mr. Wilkey. Go talk to your teacher. Let them know this is happening. And then parents need to call us and say, hey, last night I spoke to my son. He said this was going on. I asked him to come and talk to you. Would you please let me know if he comes and speaks to you? And then I'm aware of it. I tell the teacher, he or she's aware of it. So we watch to see if there's an issue that we didn't see, or we make a point where they can come talk to us. And then we can say, yeah, your mom or your dad spoke to me. And the child knows that we are the adults on the same page. We're advocating for them. And I think kids sometimes feel like they're kind of on their own, that really parents don't care, teachers don't care, principals don't care. And we really care probably more than they know, but in their brain, they thought they're about themselves. So they don't tell anybody what's going on because they try to, either hide it, deny it, or deal with themselves, and not always the best way. So just as parents, be aware, be observant, ask questions. Like I said, be relentless. It's too important not to keep asking questions. And then make the school aware, because a lot of times we don't know. We don't know. Parents will come in upset and angry, and when I'm like, what are you talking about? And they'll tell me, I'm like, okay, does the teacher know? And I'll call the teacher. It's just like, no one's ever told me this. So we don't know, we can't fix it, or we can't help. So I think the adults have got to be adults and talk to each other, especially when it comes to kids. So parent communication between the school and the family, that's probably the number one priority, is that we have got to talk, because you want the best for your kids. We want the best for your kids. So if we're not talking, then the kids suffer, So I would just tell parents to talk to the children, encourage kids to speak to their teachers, their principals, and then you as a parent need to call the school and say, hey, this is what's going on. This is what I told my child. Would you please be aware and let me know what you find out? And usually that's all it takes. It's a great, easy way to be on the same page. No one's angry. No one's defensive. We're not having to react to a horrible situation. We're being proactive, that's my favorite thing to be. Is let's get in front of it. Let's stop it before it gets bad, and then pull the kids in. Talk to the kids. I mean, and that's what I do. I talk all the time. I love to talk to kids.
That's great.
Awesome. Yeah.
Now, kind of going back to technology here, I actually recently heard, I want to say in Los Angeles County with the LA school district, I heard something that I think it was LA, but they were thinking about either like banning or removing or really restricting cell phones, specifically for their high schoolers. I'm interested to hear from your perspective. Obviously, it's a different animal in high school, but especially when it comes to the phone, how have you seen cell phones creep their way into your students and your classrooms? And when did you start seeing cell phones? And like today, how pervasive is that? Like, do all of your fifth graders have them? Some of them? Like, what does that look like with cell phones and your kiddos in your elementary school?
Well, cell phones have been around for as long as I can remember. I've been working 32 years now, and I can remember early in my high school teaching career, the beginnings of kids having cell phones, but it wasn't very many. It was just a rare few who had them. I didn't even have one. I had kids who had them before I did as a teacher. But then fast forward to now, most kids, I would dare say 98% of my kids have a
98%?
phone. And that's true.
First, like kindergarten, first grade?
Oh,
Wow.
they all have phones.
That's crazy.
They all have phones. Now, the difference is a lot of times they don't bring them to school in the lower grades. Okay. The upper grades, third, fourth, especially fifth grade, they're the ones who will try to sneak them into school, and we know they have them. And our rule is very simple. Turn it off, leave it in your book bag, put it up. Because I want the kids to have their phones, especially if they're walkers, if they walk home from school. I want them to be able to have access to call someone. So I'm all about phones. I think they have a place in this life, in this world, but not during the school day. That's where I have to draw the line. Because I think it, again, goes back to the idea that we are so used to being connected that kids don't want to disconnect. They're afraid they're going to miss something. So if they're at school for 7.5 hours and their phones are off, what am I missing? What's going on? It goes back to what I said earlier. They're always thinking about what's next, and I think that distracts from the learning. So in schools, especially here in my school, Eastside Elementary, we know they have phones, and that's not the problem. But just leave them put up during the school day, because what can happen is sometimes they'll have them out on the playground, and they'll want to like a little funny video. And then the other parent of the kid who's being videoed doesn't want their child videoed. So here we go. Then we got this parent's mad because this child posted something on social media, and this parent had a no photograph thing they signed for the school, but the other child didn't know that. So now you got a kid on social media whose parents have said, I do not want my child videoed, and they're at school, and they've been videoed, and it's on social media for whatever reason. And again, we didn't know about it because the kids did it, they snuck. They did it during recess, they did it on the bus, in the restroom. We can't always be everywhere.
Yeah.
And the kids don't always understand the bigger impact of what they did, or what they're doing. So that's where it causes a problem for us. And it's usually very minor. It's usually silly kid stuff, like taking a picture in the bathroom, posing in front of a mirror. Who cares? That's kid stuff, but not at school. Yeah. Or on the bus. Kids will want to do little rap songs, or they'll want to do like a little dance on the bus, which is highly inappropriate, very dangerous, very unsafe. But they're on their phones and they're posting videos about these things happening, and then that's when it becomes a problem. So we try really hard to, we encourage kids to have phones because I think they should have them, but just not during the school day. Every room has a phone, and we all have phones in our classrooms. Teachers have cell phones. If there's ever an emergency, we're going to contact someone for you. And we have had a few incidents where kids will call their parents, go to the bathroom, call their parent, and the parents show up to school because the kid called them. We're like, man, why are you here? Who called you? And it's the child called themselves. And then the parents come to school angry, only have heard the child's version from the bathroom stall, and the problem either wasn't real to begin with, or the problem has now gotten bigger because we have this whole miscommunication. So that's happened several times where parents have gotten phone calls from their kids during the school day, and the school had no knowledge of this. Or one kid called and said they were sick, needed to go home, so the mom left work, came to school to pick them up, and the nurse hadn't called, I hadn't called, no one had called, but the kid called and said they wanted to go home and they were sick.
Oh.
So, it's just those are the kind of things that it seems small, but it can make a big deal. Now, high school, middle school, whole other ballgame. I mean, that's my hats off. My hats off to my fellow administrators in those grade bands, because I know they have real struggles. I mean, we discuss it at meetings all the time about cell phone policies and how it has just exploded and made so many issues for the upper grades. I'm grateful that the problems I've had are just what I told you. The few incidents were misuse of the phone, but there's never been anything that's horrendous that we couldn't handle at the school level. And most of our kids comply. They're very complacent. They'll come in the morning. We have a basket in the office. They'll give the phone to the secretary. She puts the phone in the basket. At dismissal, they come. She gives it back to them. We have several kids that do that. Because they feel like it's safer in the office, and I get that too. So we tell them, give it to us. We'll keep it for you. We don't mind that.
It sounds like what I'm hearing you say is there's a lot of, even in elementary school, a lot of social media use. Are you seeing that throughout all of your grades, or is that really more your third, fourth, fifth graders are on TikTok and Instagram and posting those videos like you're talking about?
It's mostly upper grades, but there have been a few times where I've had to address a first grader who's had posted things on social media with older siblings, and it was just but the child's in first grade and these are middle school siblings, and it's just it got out there. Then someone sent me the link. They said, I think this is one of your kids, and it was one of my kids. So I had to just talk to the parent. Parents didn't know. They had no knowledge of it. And I'm like, well, that's why adults have to talk. This is why principals, teachers, and parents have got to communicate. If I say it 100 times, I'm going to say it 100 more times. The adults have got to talk, and not retroactively. They got to talk proactively, because that's the only way we can stay on the same page, and the only way kids know that we're all on their side.
Do you think parents, for the most part, know their kids are on social media, or do you think they don't learn until something like this happens where the teacher calls them?
Yeah, I think it goes both. I think it depends. I think it goes both ways. A lot of parents, they don't know, and they would tell them, and then it stops. It's over and done. Or the parents are aware, but the parents don't monitor it. They don't really check it. They don't follow up on it. And I just encourage parents. Look, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not in charge of your house. But if I were the parent, I would say number one, no, they're too young. To me, when they're middle school, that's the earliest I think they need cell phones at school or social media platforms at school or any kind of social media. I think middle school is the earliest. But again, if it's your choice for your kid, that's your child, I would just say please monitor it. Please make sure you're following them. Make sure you're looking at what they're posting. Make sure you're asking questions, because I think it's very easy for parents to get distracted and not realize exactly what is taking place on social media. It can be a very scary place. I mean, I follow lots of people, and I actually follow all of my kids just because I just want to know, and I just want to see what they're posting, what they're talking about, because again, it helps me to be more informed of what's going on beyond the school when they're not here with us.
What about when it comes to the blending of things like technology and books? So whether that's a Kindle, an iPad, or an audiobook, do you feel like, because I've even heard of some parents letting their kids do audiobooks, do you feel like how do you balance that? Because obviously technology isn't going anywhere, but there's a huge benefit in being able to pick up a book, turn the pages, and read it quietly. How do parents strike that balance in such a tech world, trying to still implement things like actual real life books?
Right. But that's hard because, and I'm a fan of both. I mean, I think kids need to do all. They need to have exposure to audiobooks. They need to have exposure to reading on tablets and Kindles. They need to have exposure to real books, real paperback books, real hardback books. It's just we have to provide them with those opportunities, and we have to say, like, fine, you can do this book, an audio book, but the next book you read, you're actually going to read the actual book. You're going to actually hold the book and read it, or get the same book and do a chapter audio, read a chapter on the audio, read a chapter. So you alternate, and then in that way the kids can hear different voices telling the same story. So I'm a fan of both, but I just think you have got to be realistic. You have to offer some some boundaries. Like I said earlier, I want to limit next year some screen time myself, because I saw some classrooms overusing the computer when they could have been doing more like hands-on kinesthetic things that would have achieved the same goal. But I just think it was easier. They'd let the kids log on, and do their work. It was less work on the teacher for planning, and sometimes with parents it's the same thing. It's just easier. Okay, fine, I get the audiobook. I don't want to fight you about having to read this book. Just do the audiobook, get your assignment done. It's just it's an easy way to avoid confrontation. But at the same time, because about what you were saying, Josh, then kids don't have the benefit of actually holding a book and reading from left to right, and and interacting with the text. Because when you see an audiobook or you watch a movie of a book, you're getting someone else's interpretation of that story, and you're not giving yourself the chance to read it and with your own internal monologue, your own internal voice, interpreting things, and that's just something I wish more kids did. I mean, I'm a reader. I love to read, and I just don't think a lot of kids get the pleasure out of doing that, and the actual their own interaction with the book. Like I said, movies are great. I love all movies. I love TV. I love Netflix. I love the series. I love Hulu. I love all that stuff. But nothing can replace a book. Nothing. And I do tell kids, like I just said to you, when you watch a movie or you do an audiobook, that's not your version. That's their version. That's their interpretation, and you're missing what the author may have put in there. You're missing some rich dialogue, some rich vocabulary. You're missing so much.
What about your books? Why don't you tell listeners a little bit about the stories you've written and where they can go and find those stories?
I tell you, first of all, all my books are because I'm a teacher. That's where all this started from. When my first series is my Mortimer Drake series, and I remember teaching 8th grade. And because I've always been a reader, I'm a huge reader, and I've always told stories. I've always had these ideas in my head for books. But the catalyst for really starting to write young adult novels was, as a teacher, I didn't see a lot of boys reading. It just really bothered me. Girls were reading all the time. Some boys read, but generally, boys weren't reading. It was just not something for them. And so I would kind of ask some questions like, why don't you read? And well, the books are boring, or they're like love stories, or they're all stupid. And I'm like, well, there are some books that are like action packed, with some gore and some cool fight scenes. And they're like, no, I don't want to read. So I started thinking then, if I were going to write, I would want to write books that would attract young male readers, to get them into reading. So when I had the idea for Mortimer Drake, which was a dream, by the way, I had a dream one night, and I woke up, but I could not remember the dream at all. But I remember the 3 words was "growing up dead." I thought, well, that'd be a great title. That's a cool book title, and that's all I thought. That was it. So then over the next couple of weeks, this idea came to me about growing up, adolescent, teenagers, middle school. That was my whole world then. I was a middle school teacher. That's all I knew was just the angst of growing up, and we've all been there. So we all have our own middle school stories, teenage stories to tell. But I also love supernatural. I love monsters and ghosts, and my favorite is vampires. They've always been the vampire. That's my favorite mythological creature. So anyway, this idea came to me about growing up dead. What if I wrote a book about a boy who's in middle school? He's already going through all the growing up stuff we all go through, but then add to it that he's not even totally human. He's a product of a mixed marriage. His mom's human, his dad's a vampire. So I could bring in all these great social things, racism, discrimination, finding your place in the world, finding your own voice. But I added to it this element of the supernatural, so I could talk about those same subjects, those same hardcore topics, but in a much more creative, fun, creepy way. And it worked. I mean, I started getting lots of young readers and even adult readers. They liked it. And I would get feedback saying, this was great because it reminds me when I was growing up or when I was struggling with so-and-so, but, him having to deal with being the vampire. It's the same thing. It was just him figuring out who he is. He's got his 2 families, his mom's family, his dad's family. We all have in-laws. We know what it's like. And it's like, where does he belong in this family? Who is he? His grandmother doesn't like him. His aunt does. He has his cousins he's never met before. It's all these things that we go through. So that was who Mortimer Drake was for me. He was a way to talk about growing up, but also to add in all these stories about social justice and how to be who you are in a very complex world, and how to be proud of who you are. And it doesn't matter, your background. You're here. This is you're unique. The world needs you as you are, and so that's how Mortimer Drake started.
Awesome. Yeah. Where can our listeners find your books?
Well, Amazon has all of my books. I publish through Amazon exclusively, so Amazon has all of my books. And you can order them on demand, and which I like it because there's no pre-printed books, so it's very environmentally more.
Yeah.
It's better for the environment because there's no books that's waiting to be sold. Like when you order it, they print the book right then and send it to you, which I love that. So Amazon has all of my books, so that's where that's where they're sold.
And if you are listening or watching this podcast, we will be sure to link Greg's books on Amazon in the video description, so you can find it there and support him. Now, we want to transition a little bit from kind of your school life to a little bit more of your personal life. Now,
Okay.
you haven't mentioned this yet, but for our listeners, you are a widower. Your wife, Allison, passed away, I believe, 10 years ago. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was 10 years ago, February.
So,
yes.
kind of with that in your story, I'm interested to know, how did you go about processing your grief over something obviously that is very personal, unexpected, a deep loss, and how has going through that process of grief allows you to kind of build yourself and your life back up in a positive way through that?
This is a topic near and dear to my heart. Allison, she was only 42 when she passed away. She was very young, also a teacher. And it was sudden. There was no warning. She had a heart attack. It was 6:45 on a Friday morning. We were in the kitchen, getting ready to go to work. We had our normal conversation, discussing, that night's dinner, a movie we were going to watch, just, our normal talk. Kissed her goodbye, told her I loved her, and that was it. I never saw her alive again. She went to school. 7:40, not even an hour later, they called me and told me that she had collapsed in her classroom, and she pretty much died instantly. So that was a shock because it was like, I thought I just saw her. I mean, we were just together an hour ago. What do you mean she collapsed? So anyway, that really messed me up. I mean, it played a number on me, and I look back now, 10 years later. It was just because it was so sudden. There was no time to process it. I mean, I turned my back for a second, when she was gone. So in the beginning, it was pretty dark. I'm not going to lie to you. I used to be a lot bigger than I am now. I lost 100 pounds. I stopped eating. I started walking a lot because I did not want to go home. I realized I was avoiding going to the house because we'd been together 21 years when she died. So I would come to work early. I would work all day. I would leave school. I would go to a park. I would walk until it got dark. Go home, go to bed. And then during all that time, I wasn't eating. I would skip meals. Her love language was food. That was how she took care of people. And so we ate a lot together, and it was just fun. It was a social time. We always enjoyed dinner and going out to lunch, and she was just amazing in the kitchen. And I realized when I was going through some grief counseling that food was a trigger for me because it reminded me so much of her. Because the doctor even asked me one time, my counselor, when they realized I was losing my weight, I lost 60 pounds before I even realized I'd lost weight. It wasn't even processing to me. I was not. And the doctor said to me, well, you're eating something because you're not dead. So what are you eating? And I was like, well, I said, pretty much I like tuna fish and I'll eat some boiled eggs. And she was like, well, so why is it those are okay, but other things aren't? And I was like, I don't know, but I just don't know. And she said, let me ask you this question. Did Allison like those things? And I was like, oh, no, she didn't. And that was my aha moment. I was connecting food with her. So now I was looking for things that she didn't eat, that she didn't fix. So I was able to eat those things because it didn't remind me of her. So it's funny how the grief to me was very, very physical. I mean, it was self-torture. It was a lot of survivor's guilt. I denied myself pleasure because I just thought I didn't deserve to be happy because she was gone. And my writing suffered too. I mean, I quit writing. I was working on the first book in another series when she died. And I would try to go back and write, and I would pull up the manuscript and see that last paragraph, and all I could think of when I wrote that, she was alive. When I wrote that, she was still here. And I could not bring myself to write. So for months after she died, I went to work and I slept. That was my life. So I had the idea. I thought, no, Greg, you got to get yourself together. You got to do something. You can't live this way. And I missed writing so much. Writing was a big part of who I was. And I didn't realize just how much it was a part of me until I stopped doing it. So I woke up on a Saturday morning, got dressed, got my computer and my laptop, and I went to Starbucks. And I opened up my story, and I was able to write because I took it somewhere else. I got out of the house, a different situation, different location, and I wrote a whole page from that last paragraph. And then when I was able to open it up the next time, it was new. It was different. It's a mental mind game I played with myself. But then I was able to finish the book. It's so funny you say earlier about the grieving process. When I read that book, I could see where it changed. The beginning of the book and the end of the book, the whole tone is so different because I had changed drastically. And the second book in the series I wrote, I didn't even realize it until I published it and I was reading it again. That was my grief. The whole second book, my character, what he was going through, it was me. And I didn't even know it at the time. I was just writing it, and I realized all that was coming through me through my book. So his second book in my Edgar Flack series is called Crosswalker. It's all about, it's me. And I just did not even make the connection while I was doing it. So again, the power of writing. It's very important. Journaling, using your words. I used to always joke and say, I believed with my words. And I do. I believe with them. I do not apologize for it. I'm an emotional person. I will cry. I do not hide my feelings. But I do think that saved me because I was able to talk about it. And I did not shy away from talking about it. I expressed my feelings, good or bad. So that I was able to come through the other side and start to rebuild my life. And put myself out there because I wasn't sure if I would ever date again. I didn't even know where to begin because I met Alice in high school. I was 18, she was 17, so my entire adult life, I was with her. So I remember thinking, where would I even go to meet somebody? I felt like I felt so old and just useless when it happened because I thought I'm only 43. I may have a lot of life left in me, and now I'm 53. But I remember going through the first few years when I started to even maybe want to date or go out with someone. I don't know where to start. I don't even know where to go, what to do. So luckily, who I'm with now, who I'm engaged to now, we've been friends for years just through education. So our paths had already crossed. So we already had a little bit of history. So when she and I started hanging out socially and it progressed into something wonderful, and I'm so happy, it was nice. It was very comfortable.
You said something interesting where you said you could see a difference in your writing. I'm interested, what exactly in your eyes was different about it? Was it darker? Did you see more of yourself? What stood out to you that was different?
It became much more serious. Like the first of the book was, it was a ghost story, so it had some elements of some fear, terror, but it was a little more light. It was more young adult, more just. But then from the point when she died on, Edgar became a much more serious character. He became much more determined, much more focused, much more driven, and I realized that was because I had gone from being a very spoiled husband. I'm not going to lie. Allison took very good care of me, and I went from being well cared for, spoiled, loved, kind of carefree to being in charge of myself for the first time in my life. Now I went from being my parents' son to being her boyfriend, her fiance, her husband. So I never was ever on my own until I was 43 years old. And then suddenly I was by myself and in charge of my own house, in charge of my own bills, in charge of my own shopping, in charge of everything. And before I'd always had someone to help me. And I noticed in my writing that my character became much more aware of himself, much more like, I've got to do this. I've got to be strong. I've got to power through. And that's why the second book was all about that. It was all about him just struggling and trying to find himself. And I thought, because that was me. I was having to find myself all over again. I did it once growing up, and then at 43, who am I now? I'm a whole other person. Because the Greg I was when she was alive, that Greg died too. The funny thing about grief is that you grieve two people. You grieve the one you lost, and you grieve yourself because who you were cannot be that person anymore because they're gone. So you have to find a new way. You have to find a new path in life, and I did. And I'm very grateful. All that darkness and pain I went through, it's just horrible to say now, but I wouldn't trade it. I would not trade it because now it's brought me to where I am now. So when I think about Allison, I still miss her. I'll always love her. But had I not gone through all that, then I would not be who I am today, which is the Greg I am now, to be with Jill, my fiance, and her family. Because you have to change. I'm a quote lover, and one of my favorite quotes is, "The person you were when the storm began is not the person you'll be when the storm is over." And I remember that because who I was 10 years ago. I mean, we're very different people.
I'm curious to know, because writing is your art form. I'm a writer myself. I'm curious to know, has your writing gone back to like a middle place of who you were with Allison and who you were right when she passed away? Or is it, have you gone back to more of a positive spin? Like, I'm just curious how your art form has changed.
Yep. It is it's changed. It's never gone back fully to what it was before, but I also think that's okay. I mean, even if my wife had not died, I mean, it could be anything. It could be a life-changing event. Getting married, getting divorced, buying a house, changing jobs, moving to another city, having children. Anything can change, your situation. So my writing has definitely changed, but I actually like it more now because how do I say this? There's so many happily ever after stories out there. Everything ends perfectly. Everybody gets what they want. Okay, that's not life. I mean, we all want a happy ending, and I do think it's great to have happiness and joy. But sometimes you have to go through some bad stuff. And it's not about what you're going through. It's about how you come out of it. It's about how you deal with it. So, almost every book I write now, there's an element of that in there. About the struggle. And I was on a panel one time in New Orleans, and someone said, your characters always have something wrong. They never get what they want. And I'm like, well, when I was 15, I didn't get what I wanted either. I wasn't a vampire, of course, but it was one of those things where, but it's okay. I still came out of it on the other end, okay. And Mortimer eventually comes out of it okay. It's not what he wanted when the book series started, but he ended up in a pretty good place. So my writing is usually there's an element of that. There's a lot of struggle. There's a lot of opposing forces in my books. I think that definitely got stronger after Allison died because I felt that myself, because I was suddenly, in a place where I didn't know where anything. I mean, I felt like a kid all over again, and I had to relearn who I was without her. So my writing has never gone back fully to being as carefree I still have funny moments in there, but there's a much more serious tone to all my stories now. It's a much more serious undercurrent to what's going on.
And then, how has your personal experience with loss and rebuilding your life and your art and things like that, how has that influenced your approach to education and leadership as a principal?
Well, what it did for me is it already magnified who I was as a person. I am I'm very accepting. I'm very open-minded, and I'm very willing to have new experiences. And when Allison died, and I'm still going through this time without her. It really made me more and more aware of the importance of kindness and the importance of. And I hate to say the word tolerance, because I think that's to me, don't tolerate me, accept me. There's a big difference. So I think it made me more accepting. It made me realize just how important it is to be willing to have conversations, to learn, because you don't know what you don't know. And I think as a teacher, as an educator, as a person, the older I get, and the more I see, the more the more I know to my heart and to my core that you've got to be kind. That's it. And you've got to be accepting. You've got to be non-judgmental, because you don't know what someone's going through. You don't know what has brought them to where they are in life. You don't know who or what made them the way they are. Because I remember I was at Starbucks after Allison died. I was having some coffee, feeling sorry for myself. I was in the corner, kind of pouting, just why me? Why her? Life is not fair. And I was looking around at people. I love to watch people. That's the writer in me. I'm a people watcher. And I was watching, and I remember I started thinking, well, what about that lady? I wonder what she's going through. What about that guy? He might be on drugs. He might be having an affair with someone. I mean, I was looking around thinking, just because I can't tell on the surface what they're going through, like they couldn't look at me and say, "Oh, that man just lost his wife." No one knew that. I knew that. So, loss has taught me to be much more gentle and much more patient, and not expect people to be me, I mean, because they're not me and I'm not them. So I think if anything, that's what it's taught me, and I'm grateful for that, because I do not want to be anyone other than that. I want to be kind. I want to be accepting. I want to be loving. I want to be nurturing. I want to be welcoming. And when I lost Allison, I felt so alone, and I felt so isolated for so long. I wasn't, but I felt that way. That's the way I processed it, and I remember those feelings. And I don't want anyone ever to feel that way. I want people always to know that they're cared for, that they're loved, that they're wanted. So that's what drives me. And going through loss has made that stronger in me, and I'm grateful that didn't leave me when all that happened.
You had mentioned having survivor's guilt and having a hard time feeling happy, feeling guilty about feeling happy. How did you get to a place where you could give yourself permission to feel happiness without your wife, and then continue that process to where you could give yourself permission to fall in love again and kind of experience those joys of life and love again?
Again, it didn't happen overnight. It took a long time. Small talks in the beginning with myself, with some of my closest friends, and in fact, my mother. She lost my dad when I was 21, so he's been dead 32 years. So she's been widowed for a long time herself. And one day I remember I called her. I was just really upset, and she was very good just to listen to me, because she had been there. She understood what I was talking about. And I said to her, I hated my house. I didn't want to be there anymore. I wanted to quit my job. I wanted to move to a new city and just start all over again, because it was too many memories. I couldn't ever get past it. And she said, "Honey, I don't know when, I don't know why." She said, "But one day you're going to be okay. You're going to wake up. You're going to feel better. You're not going to be as upset." She said, "And you'll be able to function again." And I just didn't believe it. I got angry. We had a big fight, because I thought, no, you don't understand. This is not, I can't do this. So anyway, that kind of stuck in my head, her little voice. And I heard it many times when I would get invited to go somewhere, and I would be like, "No, I don't want to go." And I'd be like, no, it's okay, go. I want to feel better. I want to get out of this. I started making myself do more social things with friends, because I would avoid, for a long time, any kind of social setting. I would make up excuses, or I would not answer the phone and lie and say I didn't see the text, which I did. So the more I made myself do things to get me out of the house, to get me away from that cycle of grief, I was able to start having more fun. And then eventually the fun became less, there was less guilt attached to it, And then I was leaving school one day, it was a Friday, and for a long time I hated weekends after she died, because those were like 2 days of just I had no work to distract me, no kids, no teachers. So the weekends were not good. And if I wasn't asleep, I would just go places, just anywhere to go to get out of the house. So anyway, I was leaving on a Friday, and I caught myself smiling, and I wanted to go home. I was excited about the weekend, and I was looking forward to being at home for the weekend. And I called my mom in the car, crying. I said, "Mom," I said, "I think you're right. It happened." I said, "For the first time in over a year, I'm not dreading going home. And I'm looking forward to going to the house." And that was a big moment for me. When I had that moment when I wanted to go home, I wanted to be in my house. I was not dreading 2 days being by myself. That was the moment when it became different. And I started looking for situations, looking for moments to feel that way again. It became like almost an addiction. I was trying to get that back so bad. So that's when I really started going out and doing things and meeting people and putting myself out there.
Now, what was it like for you to step into a new relationship with your now fiance, Jill, who already had children, older kids? And then how do you guys navigate building your relationship with each other and her children?
Well, I got to tell you a little story because our history is quite unique. Jill actually knew Allison before she knew me. And we're all teachers, all educators. So 2007, I got named as the assistant principal at a school here in town. And so I was telling Allison, and she said, "Oh, Jill works there." And I was like, "Who?" She said, "Oh, she's great. You'll love her. She teaches kindergarten. She's a good friend of mine." Okay, perfect. So I met Jill that fall, and I was the assistant principal, and she was on the staff as a teacher. Allison was still alive. Jill was still married. But we hit it off as colleagues from the very beginning. We just had a good time working together. Her daughter was a brand new baby. I actually held her daughter several times at school, in the building. Her son was preschool, so I remember him. He remembers me being the assistant principal when he was in preschool kindergarten. So 2 years later, I get moved to another school. But over the years, Jill and I, our paths kept crossing, for work, meetings, conferences, different panels, whatever workshops. So we never lost touch. We had to share a circle of friends. So I always knew her and I always liked her. Okay, Allison passes away. Jill goes through a divorce. So we continue talking, and then one day we're out having lunch, and we're just having a great time. And I remember thinking, this feels a little different. This is something was there. I could tell. I could just feel some kind of connection. So it was Christmas. It was December 23rd. We were both out Christmas shopping. We met for lunch, and I said to her, "Well, if you're out later, maybe we can meet for dinner. Give me a call." Well, I didn't think she would call. That night I got home about 6:30. She calls me, and she's like, "Hey, I'm done shopping. Did you want to meet for dinner?" I'm like, "Well," I said, "Well, I'm already home." I said, "Why don't you just come over to my house, and I got some food here, some drinks. We'll just hang out here." And that's how it kind of started. She came over, we spent the evening together, and then the next morning, we talked again, and then more lunches, more dinners, and then you fast forward, now we're engaged. But as far as the blended family, I never had children, of my own. Allison and I never had kids, and I never really was driven to have them. But now that I'm in this kind of stepdad role that's still developing, I really, really like it. Her kids are amazing. They from day one, they have been, just wonderful. And again, I think it's because I've known them all their lives. I mean, they always knew Mr. Greg. I was just one of their mom's friends. Even her daughter Abby, growing up, she read my books. I went to her school one day as a guest author. There's a picture of me and her when she was in third grade. So I have a hard time remembering not knowing them. It's funny. It's like I've always known them. Even when they talk about stories with their babies and kids, I feel like I was there. Although I wasn't, but in my mind I was because I knew them as they were children. So it made the blending a lot easier because we already knew each other. There was already like a comfortable past there. But it's also been hard because I'm used to not having to share people, and in dating when you're, or when you're childless, your time is your time. You want to go, you want to go, you want to stay. But when you have kids in the picture, you can't just jump and run. We had a few tense arguments in the beginning, Jill and I, when I want to go do something and she couldn't go. I'm like, why not? I have to go home. I have kids. I'm like, oh, okay. I had to learn to balance that, but now I get it. And so, but they're both adults. Her son's 20, her daughter will be 18 this October. So they're grown adults. They're amazing young people, and I'm just grateful that that I have her, and I have them as well. So I got like a whole package. I said to her, I said, I didn't mean to fall in love with your kids too, but I did. That was never my intention. I wanted. But now I want everybody. I want the whole package.
That's great.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it really is. So, having gone through the life experience that you have, especially being now 10 years further down the road from that, if you could maybe give some advice or encouragement to someone who maybe is a little bit closer to that grief point, right, to that hurt, what would be the advice you would give them, kind of like your mom gave you in that moment, to encourage them as they're kind of in the midst of it, knee deep? They feel that darkness in a lot of places in their life. What would you say to that person?
To be honest and be transparent with what you're feeling. I think a lot of times people are either afraid or they're ashamed to share their grief. I think they feel like they'll be judged or they feel like people won't understand. And most people understand. I mean, we've all lost someone in our lives, so we can all identify with some grief at some level. And I just think if the more people could talk about it, again, back to words. I think when you give your thoughts voice, when you give your emotions voice, I think they lose their power over you because you're able to say it. So from the very beginning, I was very open with my grief. Social media posts, live videos talking about it. And I didn't want people to not ask me how I was feeling. I wanted to talk about it because I think the more I did, it made me stronger. So I would give anyone who's going through grief or a loss of any kind, with whatever you're comfortable with, share. Talk about it. You do not have to suffer in silence because I think I was surprised when I would talk the things I would learn about people, what they had gone through. And this idea of like this shared experience of grief and misery, we all have it. I think there's safety in that. There's comfort in that. So when I realized I was part of a much bigger world, and that I was not unique to my grief, it does make you feel better. It makes you feel better. So I would just say, please be honest, please be transparent, and feel what you feel, and don't apologize for it. If you're in a good mood, be in a good mood. Don't feel guilty. If you're crying, cry. If you're angry, be angry. If you're depressed, be depressed. Just whatever those feelings are, don't suppress them, don't deny them. Roll with them, and I think, and then give them voice. I think the more you can talk about it, the better you'll feel, and it gives you strength. It gives you power to push on.
Was sharing it and talking about that, was that something that you had to like really make yourself do, or was that something that felt more natural? Like, this is a release for me.
For me, it was always natural because, like I said earlier, I'm an emotional person, and I've never shied away from my emotions. I never have. Now, I will say, when she first passed away, I had that shock that kind of hit me, and I kind of withdrew for a while, and I was just in my own head. But I knew even then, I wanted to talk about it. I knew I wanted to say things. I knew I wanted to share, but I wasn't exactly sure the right platform, the right situation. So other than my close family and friends and my grief counselor, I didn't share much. But then I began to post on social media. I would just do like these random thoughts that I was having, and these random connections or these random memories of her, and when I did that, when I gave voice to my feelings, it was immediate. I felt better. It was immediate. And so it made me want to do it more. So it made me want to talk more, and eventually, it became, it was just no big deal. And hearing her name mentioned didn't bother me. People talk about her didn't get me upset. And it actually made it easier because it gave her memory a lot more validity. So that's why I just think it's so important that you share and talk and be honest with your feelings and don't hide those things.
Yeah, well, we are very grateful that you would share your story with us here on the podcast. Having known you for many years, you're right. You have been very honest and transparent with that. And you've been a real inspiration to myself and a lot of people, I think, in showing that bad things happen in life, but you can continue to pursue being a healthy version of yourself, even in the midst of that. I've definitely seen you not just talk about that, which you have, but really model it in just how you live. And so I just want to thank you for that and commend you for that and the inspiration you are. If people want to connect with you and want to learn more about you and be connected, what are some ways that they can find you?
If you go to any social media, you can type in Wilkey Writes, WRITS, Wilkey Writes, and that pulls up all my social media, my Instagram, my Twitter, my Facebook, my email address, which is on my website. So anytime you want to find me, just type in Wilkey Writes, and everything pops up. And when I do respond to emails, I have a Facebook page that's personal, but I also have a Facebook page for my books. It's Greg Wilkey, I think best-selling author of YA fiction. It's on Facebook. You'll see it. You can message through there. I always respond. I have lots of great communications back and forth with people on that page. So I welcome comments. I welcome questions. So please, Wilkey Writes. I'm all on there.
Great. And we will also have those links in the description as well, so you guys
listening and watching can connect with Greg, and like we mentioned earlier, definitely support him in his writing and find his books. Now, we do want to wrap up the episode here on a fun note. We figured if you guys have listened to the podcast in the past, you've heard us do the Kids Keep It Real segment. We've shared some great stories. You guys have shared some stories with that about our kids being just a little bit too honest. That always gives us a good laugh. Yeah. We figured who better to ask to share a story than someone who has been in public education for 30 years. You're an author. I told you when we started, you probably write a whole book on kids being a little too honest. You've heard probably everything.
Oh, yeah.
So why don't you share with our listeners one of your favorite stories over the years of how a kid has kept it real, maybe a little too real.
Well, this is actually a two-parter. This cracks me up. A few years ago, I was helping in the classroom with a teacher, and she had a small group of kids. And I'm a language person, so that's my thing. So I said, yeah, I'll do some phonics, with this group of kids. What are you studying? What are you learning? So she told me. So I planned a little lesson for them. So I went in that next day. They were like, "Ooh, Mr. Wilkey, the principal, he's going to work with us." Sure. So we got to a table. We were sitting there. There's like 5 or 6 kids. So we're going through little flashcards I made. I'm asking them questions, and we're doing this whole lesson about, phonics. And when it was over, this little girl says, "Mr. Wilkey, you should be a real teacher." She says to me. And I said, "I'm sorry." She said, "No." She said, "You're really good." She said, "Why aren't you a real teacher?" And I said, "Well, honey, I am a real teacher." I said, "No." She said, No. You're a principal. You're not a teacher." And I said, "But every principal is a teacher first." She said, "What did you teach?" I said, "I taught Spanish and French." And we had this whole conversation about the fact that I'm a teacher, but in her brain, there are different things. There's a teacher, there's a principal. She had no clue that I'd actually taught, 15 years. I taught kindergarten, first grade, second grade, middle school, high school. No, I was just a principal. She just was convinced that, that's all I did. And And another part of that same story, when I was telling this group, or her, but the whole group was listening, that I was a teacher. And this other little girl looked at me, she said, "You said you taught Spanish?" I said, "Yes, I speak Spanish." She said, "You can't speak Spanish." She said, "You're white." She said to me. And I said, "Honey," I said, "anyone can speak Spanish." I said, "You don't have to be, Hispanic or Latino," or I said, anyone can learn it. I said, "Yes, you are right. I am white." I said, "I am." I said, "But I learned Spanish because I loved it so much. I thought it was fun." So that one moment, I had 2 different kids in the same group kind of had these aha moments that, teachers can be principals are teachers, and anyone can learn any language they want to learn, regardless of your color,
That's funny.
So those are good moments.
I love how, in her mind, you're the principal. That's all you are. That's all you have ever been.
Yep. That's it. I can't do anything else to be a principal. I do not know anything about teaching. I know discipline. I know bus duty. I know schedules. I know money. But I don't know. But I can't teach second grade phonics. Yes, I can.
Yeah. Oh man, that's great.
It's kind of like when you see your teacher outside of school as a little kid, and you're like, they exist outside of the school building.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure you've had kids that think you live there, right?
They're convinced I live here. I actually have told them I have an upstairs apartment, and I have a few kids who believe me that I never go home because I'm always here in the morning. I'm always early. I usually leave last, so they always see my car outside, and I just don't go home. I'm like, no, I actually do have a house. I have family and friends. I don't just do this. Mr. Wilkey is he's here, but Greg is somebody else.
Oh man, that's so great. I love that. Well, thank you for sharing that. Thank you again for being on the show, giving us your time. We really appreciate it. We hope you guys have enjoyed listening. I hope you've enjoyed watching. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you are listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, one of the best ways that you can support the podcast is by giving us a 5-star review. That helps out a lot and really helps the algorithms to share that out with other parents. And if you're watching on YouTube, thank you. We'd love for you to like the video and subscribe to the channel to become part of the GTG community.
Yes, and always remember, if your kids are safe and they know they're loved, you're doing it.
You are. Greg, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it. Thank you guys for watching. We hope you have a great rest of your day. We'll see you next time.